Magnificent. This may look like the result of a careless THC-laced forklift operator, and it probably is, but the guy was trying to help me out. This creates a scoop that clears the rear vortex, relieving critical drag. I suppose you want to know how this tetanus-inducing welding project turned into a magnificent piece of shimmering zinc art. Well, I loaded the chassis onto a trailer and took it to a guy in Rotorua who dipped it in acid. At this point I had the galvanizing organised through a friend of mine who works at a galvanizing plant in Tauranga, which isn't actually a galvanizing plant anymore. Now it just functions as a depot and they truck stuff to their other galvanizing plant in Hamilton. So you might think that I would take the chassis directly to where the galvanizing will happen in Hamilton. But no, did I mention that my friend works in Tauranga? Betrayed! The dip stripper said the chassis was done. I paid the bill, rang my friend to tell him I'd drop the chassis off tomorrow. He said, wait a minute! Made some calls and it turns out their truck taking stuff to Hamilton just happened to be leaving Rotorua right now. So a phone call and a favour later and my chassis fell freight free onto a truck heading in the right direction. And I really appreciate that. 2 weeks later the chassis was galvanised and delivered to the depot in Tauranga. I hired a trailer, drove over to collect it, talked about cricket for a few hours and then headed home. Is there anything better than a freshly galvanised chassis? Well, in the whole world there's probably lots of things better than a galvanised chassis. Obviously, I decided to galvanise my chassis. Galvanising a chassis is better than not galvanising a chassis, but it is expensive. Very quickly, the galvanising process includes a cleaning dip, an acid dip, flux, then the zinc itself, and a quench. The cleaning part of galvanising does a good job at cleaning grime and scale off parts that are dirty from being handled in a workshop. That's what it's designed to do. A filthy old chassis covered in old paint and oil and dried sheep shit is too much. If you put something like that through galvanising, it'll come out a patchy mess. So it needs to be prepared first, back to bare steel. A lot of people sandblast. That's the normal way to prepare metal for galvanising, but that does nothing for the inside of the chassis. If you want an old chassis to be properly galvanised inside and out, the only real option is to get it dip stripped first. Dip stripping will clean everything back to bare metal, inside and out, but it's expensive. The stripping alone cost $1,000. The galvanising itself is pretty cheap. Full price is about $300 for a Land Rover chassis. There are some interesting side effects to galvanising. The first cool side effect is that your welding wire is a slightly different composition of steel than the mild steel used for the chassis. These welds were ground flush, but the zinc is more attracted to the welding wire, so the galvanising is about double the thickness above each weld. Isn't that cool? Not cool. Secondly, some guy whose job it is to drill holes all day is going to drill holes all through your chassis. In most cases that's fine. A Land Rover chassis has holes all over the place. What's a few more? The zinc has to be able to flow through the chassis. Lots of holes are just part of the process. Now, I did intend to drill the holes alongside my friend who works at the galvanizing plant, so he could say what was needed and I could put them in good places. But because the chassis got a free ride directly to Hamilton, that didn't happen. The only holes I really don't like are the extra holes on the front extensions. These 2 holes are for the bumper, but the other 3 were put in by the galvanizer. Same on both sides. And I think the 2 on the top are going to be visible and probably stand out at the front of the vehicle. Without assembling everything, I'm not sure if the front valance will cover them or not, so I made them go away. That's better. And that's it. Otherwise everything is perfect. Not perfect. I can't believe I missed the rust hole. It's not a big deal. I think you have to accept with an old chassis that you might miss something or want to modify something later. This rust hole is a bit strange, right above a seam, but everything around it is completely solid. The crossmember is open at both ends, so I guess some mud or something lived right behind this patch, soaking up water every time the road was wet. Who knows? You've probably guessed, because of the way I'm happily cutting through the zinc, that I will be painting the chassis. Of course I will be painting the chassis. Look, I know it's fashionable for people when they restore these to show off their shiny zinc chassis. But some people also think it's fashionable to tuck their t-shirt into their undies. Weirdos. I will be painting this one army green. No, that's also weird. Black. It's going to be black. First, we need to prep the galvanizing for paint. When a part is galvanized, the last step of the process is a quench. This makes the surface very glassy and also traps any contaminants in the surface. So we need to remove that with lots of wax and grease remover and a massive piece of Scotch-Brite. You call that a Scotch-Brite? This is a Scotch-Brite. Well, actually this is fake Scotch-Brite, but the other one was small and this one is really big. Now, when you get something back from galvanizing, there's going to be a few dags hanging off it, where the zinc solidifies as it drips off, like a stalactite. I realise that's not how a stalactite forms. It's a bad analogy, but you get the point. Haha, point, get it? Stalactite, point. Anyway, in this case I didn't cut through the zinc, but I'm painting everything so it wouldn't have mattered. I can see they've already cut the worst of it off at the factory. The camera angle isn't good, but there were still maybe 6mm thick globs around this point. So I just smoothed them down a bit. Pause for the future. Next owner, I'll be dead, that's why I'm telling you now. The chassis number is stamped on the chassis right here, and it matches the build plate as far as I recall. Anyway, the steel here is all original to the chassis, and if you really want to see the number, you can burn off a little zinc with a torch. Now, the rear crossmember is a little ugly. It looks like the zinc kind of congealed as it ran off. The end result is a bit like tree bark. I'm going to quickly run over it with a sander, just to knock off the high spots, and we'll see how it looks after paint. I don't want to spend a lot of time smoothing it out now, if it's not going to be noticeable. Okay, I think the chassis is ready to go. Now I need to come up with some way to hold it. I could just spray it like this. Wait, what the hell is that? You sneaky little devil. How did I not notice that before now? Okay, where were we? I could just spray it like this, but that'd be a really drawn out process, so I need a better way to hold it. You see where I'm going with this? So my plan is to hang it from this point while it dangles on a couple of spindly legs. That means I'll be able to get the entire chassis in one shot, and the only part I might miss is the little bit underneath this bolt. That's the plan anyway. Okay, so hopefully 2 of these on each pipe is enough to hold it. I don't think I'm going to pull the sawhorses out, but otherwise it looks pretty good, only deadly. This is the primer I'll be using, a 2-part epoxy. So that's it, 2 coats of primer. I think the epoxy primers look pretty good by themselves, but I will be putting a top coat on. I'm using a 2K acrylic urethane, car paint basically. You'd call this a single stage satin black. The main reason I went with this type of paint over anything else is because it's licensed under the 1981 Meat Act. And here it is. This is actually a few weeks after I painted it. Some other turd got in the way. It looks really good overall, but I am going to do some remedial work. I'm going to respray the rear cross member. I was half expecting to do this anyway, I just thought I would see how it looked first. As I mentioned earlier, the galvanizing has a very strange texture to it on this surface. And this part of the chassis is on display, so I'm going to quickly smooth it out and give it another coat. And now it looks great. No, runs. And now we're done.
Nope.
The outside is done. Galvanized, 2 coats of epoxy, and 2 coats of urethane. Well, apart from the rear cross member that has many coats. And that equals maximum protection. The inside, however, is just galvanized, which is probably not going to sacrifice itself in a time frame that concerns me, but it's still a sacrificial coating, and this is a fabricated chassis. The rails are welded on all corners, and it's likely there are internal seams where the pieces meet that haven't galvanized fully. So to make this chassis last a very long time, I'm going to fill the inside with cavity wax. This is Dinitrol, which is German I think, maybe French, whatever, same diff. 3M have the same stuff in spray cans as well. When you order spray can cavity wax, make sure you get a wand with it. It's kind of useless otherwise. I think this wand is a few dollars. I don't know exactly, they just threw it in the box for me. But if you're using 3M, they charge about $30 for an applicator kit. Yay for 3M. Now I've got the chassis upside down. I'm going to do a double wax application. Upside down first and then flip it back over. I figure because I can, I may as well let gravity help me get wax into the upwards facing surfaces, at least once. Hopefully the chassis isn't upside down too often in the future. Now before I do the inside, there is this trouble spot on the outside. This is a reinforcing plate on the top of the rear crossmember. There will be no galvanizing or paint inside this gap. So that's every part of the chassis done upside down. I went through all 3 cans that I had, and I'll have to order more. 3 cans is probably enough for a quick maintenance application, or if you just want to blast something into an old chassis. But in total, I used 7 full cans. Anyway, I'm going to be waiting a week for more cans to show up. I guess that'll be a split second for you guys. Yay, more cavity wax. But did I mention I'm an idiot? Remember this? Well, I decided that I should put some kind of hard coating over the back of the weld, after I just sprayed cavity wax all over it. It's not really a big deal. Cavity wax washes off easily with solvent. So I sprayed contact cleaner into the end of the crossmember to clean the area around the back of the weld. I used contact cleaner just because the can has a nice pointy straw. I'm going to coat it with this rust converter. There is no rust, but this stuff works fine on bare steel as well. Alright, back to the cavity wax. And that's it. We're done. Well, apart from this crossmember that I just put rust converter in, I'll give that plenty of time to dry before I bury it in wax. It's been a long time since I decided to cut the rear crossmember off. A lot of life happened along the way. It's been a saga for sure. But this is it, a symbolic step in the process. This is the bottom of the restoration trough. A bare chassis. And now stuff goes back together. I can't wait. Thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you next time.